G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I was going to have a different start to this video. However, Planet America put this on their channel and I'm going to use it for educational purposes and comment thereupon. So strap in. We'll see how this goes. And later on we will have a look at that, or at least I will. But in the meantime, I fully agree. Chaz Lucidello and John Barron probably should not have gone into winter holidays while America was going into meltdown. So it's currently 3 days since we got the news here in Australia that while Trumpy was at a rally talking to the faithful, 6 or 7 minutes into the rally, he had his ear pierced. And warning to the sensitive, I'm about to show you a screenshot magnified through a potato type phone video camera of a view of the piercing of the ear. Once again, and if you go into the angle of the dangle, which direction the shot was fired from, where and when, how far away, where Trumpy was looking, just about as the trigger would have been releasing the sear. It's pretty clear Trumpy nearly got killed. He missed death by about 1.5 inches. He missed death by 45 degrees worth of twisting or turning his neck. What are the odds on that? Highly unlikely. The shot was fired, so we are told, Thomas Crooks. We have more questions than answers right now surrounding the horrifying shooting of former President Donald Trump and others at a rally in Pennsylvania. From the motivation of the identified shooter to how this even happened, we're going to break down these issues. So that's what the young fellow looked like. Maybe a year or two ago, because he was 20 years old when he died on the roof. Okay, so what would I know? Speaking as a kangaroo feeder, I know what I've heard on the news and what I've seen on YouTube. Scrolling across the particularly informative and more or less reliable sources, which I usually refer back to when such world events have come out. So we might as well, before I start to pontificate and expound on my thoughts about why what has happened might perhaps have happened the way that it did happen, I'll rattle off a few of the things that I've gleaned along the 3 days worth of paying attention. This young fellow that got killed taking a shot at Trumpy, he was not a good shot. His father owned 20 firearms, all lawfully purchased, licensed. I don't know how he kept them and what condition he kept them in, but you know, the kid grew up with a daddy who had 20 guns. When I grew up, my father had 4. That's, if you count the .177 BSA air rifle from 1903 at the top, which I was given when I was 3 years old. Under that is a shotgun, which my father, I think he bought that. No, maybe he got it from his father. The one with a light coloured stock, it survives to this day as a camera. I took that to boarding school when I was 15 for 3 years, and I finished up being captain of the school rifle team. And the one on the bottom with the scope was my father's 5-shot bolt action 22 hunting rifle, rabbit rifle, varmint rifle. So I have owned several other weapons, and you know, at one stage I had 7 guns hanging on the wall. Yeah. Thomas Matthew Cook's father had 5 times more guns than my father had, but my dad was a sort of a low-grade amateur gunsmith in his retirement, and it was normal when and where I grew up for teenagers to be trusted with guns. When I was in primary school, the local high school cadets used to go to school in uniform with a 303 short magazine Lee Enfield over their shoulder, or an Owen gun. In the 1960s, Australia was in a war in Vietnam. The people who were going to cadets were being socialised into carrying a weapon when they were in uniform. I took my grandfather's semi-automatic exhibition target rifle to boarding school every year for 3 years, 4 years. You didn't do that unless your school had a rifle club and a rifle range and it was some use to you. But I can sort of imagine the chagrin that this Thomas Matthew Cook must have felt as a student going to the local high school, which had a rifle team in Pennsylvania, in coal mining country, where everybody around him wanted to grow up to be a hairy-chested, muscle-covered, blue-collar, hard worker. And he was apparently, by the look of him, the classic 98-pound weakling, pale-faced with pimples and braces on his teeth and glasses. So he looked like a nerd, and he wanted to be in the military, and he joined the ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps, which the Americans run in their high schools like Australians run Army cadets. And he tried out for the ROTC rifle team rather than just being, you know, put through regulation weapons training and weapons drill, but not allowed to represent his unit by shooting in competitions against other units. That's sort of the distinction between the club and the team. The club is anyone who wants to show up. The team is the people who are good enough to shoot for the school or whatever that. The high point of my career as a rifle team captain, we went to HMAS, Her Majesty's Australian ship, Creswell, which is kind of like the Australian Navy's version of West Point for the Americans, or Dartmouth for the British Navy. And we beat the Creswell rifle team, my team of school kids. And after we'd finished the day's shooting, they had a whole lot of ammunition that they'd signed for, and therefore it had to be used. So they said, here, here's a whole lot of bullets, just shoot them off before we can go home for the day, and we'll give you a cup of coffee and a bowl of ice cream, sort of thing. So we decided it might be funny to shoot at the 4-inch by 4-inch hardwood posts that the plywood target boards were nailed onto. And because I had a semi-automatic target rifle and everybody else had a bolt action, I had to be right on the right-hand end. And we shot our target posts in half and took them home as trophies. We were pretty good. We beat the Navy. Yeah, Thomas Matthew Cook wasn't in my grade of being a shooter, but his father had 5 times more guns than I had. So he's grown up with the idea that it's perfectly normal to play with guns, to think about guns, to pet them and polish them and practice with them, and to integrate them into your life. And his father's had 20 guns. The man is 20 years old. He's old enough to vote. He's old enough to register as a Republican voter, and then after the event be confused with somebody else whose name was Thomas Cook, but not Thomas Matthew Cook. And the Thomas Cook who gave $15 to a Democrat PAC, I think, organisation, fundraising committee, whatever it was, they don't accept donations from anybody who's not over 18. And when the donation was made, the Thomas Matthew Cook who did the shooting, he was under 18. So no, he did not donate to the Democrats while being a registered Republican. He was, however, a nerd. He was really good at his schoolwork, at his book work. There are people who are expressing shock and horror and amazement and dismay that he doesn't appear to have left any trace on the internet of going looking for any bomb-making instructions or manuals or explanations. Yet he had some improvised explosive devices in his car, and he had materials for making more in the house, and he apparently had a flak jacket in the car, and he had loaded magazines. He bought a ladder the day before. He bought 50 bullets for the gun the day before. He went to a shooting range and put in some practice before. You know, he had a whole lot of things all lined up. He showed up early. He went over and put his ladder up against the roof where it was more or less out of sight. I've heard various people talk about various different timelines, but the people who appear to me to be more or less very well informed, they're saying that this bloke was on the roof for 114 seconds. It was 87 seconds after a member of the public told one of the circulating police officers on the ground outside that there was a man on the roof. 87 seconds between them and him firing his first volley of 3. The first volley of 3, Trumpy's first post on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, his first excretion, said that he heard the whizzing or whistling past his ear, and then he felt the bite, and then he reached up and touched his ear and looked at it and he saw the blood, and at that point he dropped to the ground and there was another volley of gunfire. So to reconstruct, Trumpy's got a crowd in front of him where the camera is. The gunning of the man is out over about there. So the gunman has got a clear line of sight and he's aiming for centre of mass on Trumpy's head, which is just in front of the ear hole. Trumpy, however, is talking to his crowd, and as he's talking, old mate, well, not old mate, but young fella, sitting on his roof 148 yards away, so what's that, 143 metres or something, sitting on the roof. He has fired 3 rounds just as Trumpy's turned his head because he wants to look at a hanging sign that's up there over behind his right shoulder. Very rarely does he use graphs, very rarely does he get pointed anything behind him while he's working his crowd. So, by the sheer cascading, chaotic, coincidental chance, just as young fella, the Republican registered voter with his father's AR-15 platform, fires a 3-round volley aiming for here. Trumpy turns his head and the bullet, 2 of them miss entirely as far as Trumpy's concerned. One of them pierces his ear up about here. So Trumpy's like that kangaroo, Rowan of Rin, who used to come to my door in the mornings about 5-7 years ago. One morning Rowan showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was glad to hear him because the previous night at about 3 o'clock I'd heard gunfire out there in the sheep farm on the other side of the fence. And I thought, gee, I hope that's nobody I know, none of my friends. And then, lo and behold, Rowan shows up, thump on the door, wants his breakfast bread. I open the door and he looks at me and he bows down, covering his balls with his claws as he always did. And on his ear, there's a 30 caliber half moon bleeding bullet hole, or a bullet nick. So Trumpy's now got kangaroo ear on his right ear. Now, meanwhile, young fella, me lad, rather, out there, he, as his cloud of gun smoke clears, he looks through his telescopic sight, and instead of seeing Trumpy thrashing on the ground, leaking all his body fluids, having painted everybody with his brains, oh no, what he sees is Trumpy flapping at the mosquito and looking at his hand and then starting to drop from sight. And as he sees Trumpy starting to fall out of sight, he fires another. I make it 5 rounds, having listened to it a few times on various different recordings. This afternoon was the first time I heard an actually unmuffled recording. So I'm going to say there was 3 rounds in the first volley and there was 3 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds between the first 3 volley and the second volley of 5. And that's when Corey Contemporary, or whatever his name was, the 49-year-old retired volunteer fire brigade captain. Shit, that hits home. You know, I've got a 35-year-old group officer in the RFS myself. So yeah, the fella who's sort of 14-year older version of my son, he sees Trumpy go down. He knows what's happening. He's used to thinking in very high-speed terms in moments of crisis. He knocks his family to the ground and he gets headshot. Somebody else got shot in, I think, the liver and spleen and stomach. Somebody else got shot as well. And at the end of the 8th shot fired by the young fella, Thomas Matthew Cook, that's when the Secret Service sniper puts in the pop which headshot him. Okay, that's what I think we know has been released and is reliably thought to have happened at this point in the timeline. I may be wrong on some points. There's obviously a whole lot of stuff that I don't know about, but that's about the where-ness and the itness and the atness of it. Oh, hang on, a couple of other minor points. There is currently the hell of a demarcation dispute going on between the FBI, who are investigating it, what happened. They're also wearing some odium because they never noticed this fella. The FBI are the agency which investigates American population agitators, political malcontents, people who might be going to become bad actors. It was their job to find him. not the CIA. The Presidential Secret Security Service, they are deeply in the shit, well up over their head, because the whole job of protecting the president is theirs. They own it. They can't really delegate much of it because everybody defers to them, because they always tell everybody what to do. And the building that the roof was shot at from, the building that was used as a platform, where old mate put his ladder up and shinned up there and got up onto the roof. Pretty sure he pulled his ladder up so that when the bystanders, 87 seconds before he started shooting, when the bystanders told the policeman, the police were already looking for the bloke because he had been around where the metal detectors were. I don't think he actually walked through the metal detectors. He went to the outside, the gate where the metal detectors were, and he was holding a range finder. And he measured the range from the podium to the gate. I'm assuming he'd also previously measured the range from the gate where the metal detector was to the roof that he intended to shoot from, and he could do some simple triangulation because he was a nerd. He was the smarty pants kid in the class. He didn't need to go to the internet to learn how to build a bomb, rudimentary, crude, whatever it was, because he probably had been to the town library and gone into the reference section and dug out an Encyclopedia Britannica like I did when I was about 10 years old in primary school, trying to figure out how to make gunpowder in the backyard. I mean, if you can read and you've got a brain and you've got a library, you can learn without the internet. You don't have to leave an electronic trail for the sleuths to go looking for. And apparently this fella didn't have any political affiliations other than the Republican Party, but he was smart. And as you saw from Chaz Luciadello and John Barron's little song there, Trumpy being shot in the ear did not be the only thing that went wrong in America last week. The Supreme Court effectively made Joe Biden, the president, into King Joseph I of Norte Armed Americano, an authoritarian dictatorship where the president is absolutely immune for any official act. He can, if he wants to, if he is of a mind to, if he takes it on a whim, he's immune from any responsibility or accountability if he chooses to send SEAL Team 6 to go and kill anybody in America who he wants to have killed. And if they say, oh, but sir, that's against the law, it's not a lawful command, he can say, well, yeah, but I'm the president and I'm immune and I have the power of the pardon. So go to it. I don't think King Joseph has got the temperament required to exercise that power between now and November and decapitate the people who are trying to bury democracy in the USA. But when the head of the Heritage Foundation gets up on TV and says, we are in the process of running a second American revolution, it will remain bloodless as long as the left allows it to remain bloodless. Now, there are people who are saying, well, yeah, all right, maybe this Thomas Matthew Cook was an agent provocateur working for the Heritage Society. I can't see that. I can't see Trumpy commissioning anybody to frighten shit out of him by firing just off his ear hole and accidentally missing and hitting him in the ear instead. I'll take it as face value that that kid was a Republican and he wanted to kill Trumpy for his reasons. Now, what might a Republican's reasons be for wanting to kill Trumpy when Trumpy looks like he's on a bloody rocket-powered accelerated steamroller ride into the presidency for his second term, when he's announced via Project 2025 that what he wants to do is bury democratic rule of law in America and replace it with a authoritarian, tyrannical, fascist personality cult dedicated to worshipping himself and anybody who supports him and loyal followers. Why would a really, really, really smart nerd who's been known, according to all of his classmates and everybody at school, who said that, yeah, he was bullied because he was a nerd and he was bullied for wearing army clothes, And he was bullied because he held deeply conservative views. And in social history lessons and civics development classes, when the teacher said, you know, here's this mind exercise, a problem to be solved, this is the liberal view, this is the ultra-right conservative authoritarian view, which view do you hold to be the most reasonable one in your estimation? There were times, not a few of them, there were quite a few times, lots of times, when the whole class would take the sort of free will, liberal in American terms viewpoint. And the fellow who shot at ex-President Trump, he would be on his own on the other side of the class, you know, standing his ground in the conservative heartland of him and himself and just that one little footprint on the ground. Is it possible that he took one look at what the Supreme Court said about Donald Trump being a king-like person, or the president being a king-like person, because that's what Trump asked the Supreme Court to say? And the Supreme Court, they're appointed for life, which when people died of old age in their early 60s and they got appointed there in their late 40s or early 50s wasn't much of a problem. But Trumpy appointed some 30-year-olds, and they haven't been dying on the Supreme Court till their 80s, in their 80s. And if we spool it back, there's an outfit called the Federalist Society who are very, very right-wing authoritarian inclined. They managed, while Reagan was in power and while George Herbert Walker Bush was in power, to recommend right-wing Federalist Society judges to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and they were appointed to the Supreme Court, and they were in a position that when Alan Gore was about to win the presidential election, it was a very near-run thing. They were counting the ballots closely, worried about hanging chads and pregnant chads and machines that weren't working and all the rest of it. The Republican Party got lawyers to go into the Supreme Court and ask for the counting to be stopped, stay the count, on the grounds that continued counting might prejudice my client's claim to have won, and he should instead be inaugurated and we can finish the count at some later date. And the Supreme Court, stacked by the client's father, thought that was a good idea. We won't count the ballot until 6 months after the inauguration, or 6 months down the track. And when they counted them, Al Gore won by about 3,600 or 3,700 votes. And pretty much everything that's happened in America since then has been further and further and further divergent from the track of being the workings of a functional democracy, a functional representative democracy, and it's been ever further out there into the fantasy land of corrupt gangsterism, apparently. So it does seem. Okay, so the Supreme Court put W into power. Trump got in there and he stacked the Supreme Court with more Federalist judges. And those Federalist judges have just said that Trumpy is immune. Well, they've said the president's immune. And I don't know how or why those judges could make Trumpy immune from the consequences of anything that he wants to do while Biden was in office, unless they are absolutely certain that Biden is of too good a character to make personal capitalist gains out of the power that they've put into his hands. There would be absolutely nothing to prevent Biden from declaring the state of emergency in the face of rampant Trumpism, suspending the election and losing SEAL Team 6. But he won't do it because he's a reasonable person. He's not a Hitler-esque figure. If you look at the debate in which Biden made himself look like a geriatric who should have retired years ago, Trumpy told something like 3 lies a minute. And it was a contest between a tired old man and a practiced bullshit artist. And the moderators didn't fact check either of them. And the bullshit artist was observed to be smoother talking than the tired old man. And that's kind of the choice the Americans have given themselves is a smooth talking bullshit artist and a tired old man. And it's a voluntary voting system. So a lot of them aren't going to show up on polling day because they can't bring themselves to vote for either. I don't know who the independents are going to vote for. Maybe no one. But once again, because, you know, you can't stomach anybody who's standing. The only people who are going to go in there to vote are the diehard, I'm going to vote against the person I hate types, like me. You know, I have voted against global warming for 42 years. Yeah? 42? 40 years. Something like that. It's 2024. I first voted in 1980. So 44 years I've been voting against global warming. It's really easy. You just find everybody who's voting to grow the economy and you put them at the bottom, and you find somebody who's voting to prioritise the environment and you put them at the top. You have now voted against global warming. Congratulations. It really is that simple. Okay, so who's going to go to the election in November? I say it's going to be the really highly motivated people on both sides, and that there might be a record low turnout because nobody wants any of them. I think Trumpy is going to get a real big bounce in the polls because of the sympathy vote. Oh, look, they're all against him. They even got somebody to go and shoot at him. It's so bloody confused as to who shot him, what for, how come and why that nobody's really too certain about too much of it at the moment. But the fact is, America is a very, quote, religious, unquote, country. Might not be much spiritual about it, but they are very big on ringing the bell and banging the tambourine, hitting the little triangle and proclaiming themselves to be God-fearing Christians. Yep. So there is a big movement among the pro-Trump people to claim that the fact that Trumpy got out of it with a pierced ear proves that God's on Trumpy's side. Why that should possibly mean that God thinks a 49-year-old retired fire brigade captain should have his head blown to bits, and somebody else should take a round through the stomach and liver and spleen, and somebody else should get another round somewhere else. I don't know quite where they got shot. By gee, God doesn't seem to like the people who get too close to Trump, eh? Don't follow Trump too closely or God might let you get shot in the crossfire. Is that what the Republicans are trying to say? They don't appear to have a very coherent God theory in mind, do they? You know, like their idea of God seems to be a very capricious, infantile, immature, little angry, cranky God who looks at life through illuminated tunnel vision. You know, oh, Trumpy needs to be saved, so we'll let the bullets go behind him and you know, shoot up a whole bunch of people who just went there to see what's going on. Yeah, I think there's more to it than that. So let's have a look at the hypothesis of karmic feedback loops within the cosmic scoreboard effect. Oh, how very cosmical. First, put another log on the fire. Because outside it's cold. It's been cold for days. Otherwise I would probably have made this video in the sunlight, walking around in the forest. But as the saying goes, beggars can't be choosers. Feed it some updraft for a bit. Okay, right. Karmic feedback loops. within the Cosmic Scoreboard Effect. What do I mean by that? Do I hear you ask? Well, could mean a lot of things. You got to get into sort of cosmology 101. Cosmology, theory of how the universe came to be. Theology, comparative theology. Let us state that every society that humans have built anywhere on the planet has come up with a God theory, at least one God theory, sometimes many God theories, but they come up with a God theory to account for the observed incidents of synchronicity, serendipity, and benevolent coincidence within day-to-day life. People all over the world, depending on their culture, regardless of their culture, they tend to come up with the vague observation, the feeling that there appears to be more to life than what can be easily seen and touched and felt and measured. Something else is afoot. Sure, there are bad things happen to good people, but there are also a lot of arseholes who get their just desserts and their comeuppances. And there are people who get away with bad shit for a long time. And then it all goes wrong for them. After a long time of appearing to be untouchable, it goes sour for them. And they get all of their just desserts. And there's a phrase, it's entered the vernacular, just desserts. You get what you deserve. Some cultures call it God's punishment. Others call it kismet, whatever will be, will be. Other cultures speak of fate, which is a derivative of the three fates of ancient Greek culture, where on Mount Olympus there was a cave. And in the cave there were three little old ladies, crones they call them. That means they had no teeth. And these crones, they had a spinning wheel and a pair of very sharp scissors and a measuring stick or a ruler. And they only had one eyeball between them. And one of the witches, the crones, she spun the thread of your lifeline on the spinning wheel. And handed the eye over the other one, and she measures the length of your lifeline and then passes the eyeball on to the third one, who cuts it off when it's over. That's what fate is about. Karma is the idea that what you put out comes back to you. And that runs various different ways. If you do a lot of good things for other people for selfless reasons, your life tends to go pretty well and other people are nice to you. If you do everything purely for yourself, other people notice, and it depends on why you are that way as to how they respond to you and how long it takes for you to wake up to yourself and change your ways to be a bit more selfless, as to how your life progresses. It's a very curious thing, but it appears that if somebody is born to parents who, by example, role modeling, imprint with their behaviour, and then in so many words tell them, teach them, explain to them, educate them, raise them up to think a whole lot of wrong, untrue, bullshit ideas. When that baby grows up to be 14 and they become spiritually responsible for the decisions they make, are they responsible? If they try to determine what their next step should be through a framework that's been filled up, ruled up, lined up, connected up, bullshit to bullshit to bullshit to bullshit to bullshit, wrongness, misapprehension, if their whole frame of reference is wrong, is it their fault when they do a whole lot of stupid, shitty, ridiculous things? Is it their fault? Or is that their parents' fault? Recently, in the excited status of Norte Armed Americano, there was a married couple and they had a 15-year-old kid who they weren't paying any attention to. And mummy was busy having affairs with people while she was worrying about horses and dressage and borrowing money to keep a horse at a professional commercial stable so that she could compete looking dainty on a horse. When she's got a 15-year-old kid at school who's spiralling out into adolescent miseryness. And hubby buys this kid a gun. And the kid acts out in multiple different ways, does as many attention-seeking cries for help as you can pretty much shake a stick at, and then takes the gun to school and shoots up a whole bunch of people. And both the parents got convicted and jailed for negligent manslaughter, for buying him the gun and giving him the gun and refusing to take him to psychological counselling. Yeah, they got hit with a manslaughter charge, and it stuck. So yeah, people whose children grow up to do great things are always only too happy to take some credit as they bask in the reflected glory of the incandescence shining out of their offspring who's done marvellous things in the community. Tell me all about it. I've got a 35-year-old son who's a group officer in the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. He routinely runs 6 brigades, and sometimes they promote him to divisional commander and give him 24 brigades to go and play with. And air assets, and I can really relate to the idea of having a successful firefighter suddenly taken off the picture because he's as good as he's ever going to get. There has to be available options for you to choose to move further up towards the light. If you're as good as you're ever going to get, you get to be at your spiritual peak. Yeah, that's when you might get to be an innocent victim of somebody else's learning experience. Because it's one of the things about this comparative theology, cosmology business is we appear to live in either a randomly chaotic, cascading world of meaninglessness, ruled only by physics and chemistry and mathematics and quantum mechanics, or we live in a world where there's something going on, where there's a kind of set of rules and purposes, and depending on how you choose to behave, you pick your own future, because we live in a world of free will. You can be raised to be an obedient murderous killer, and you can do that until it sticks in your craw, and then you stop doing it. And if you were young enough when you got your head filled full of those stupid ideas, you might even get through 5 or 6 years of world war and come out the other end of it with 352 scalps hanging on your belt and not dead yet, because you were too young and too dumb when your mind was moulded into making you think that was a good idea, and all you've done ever since you first got into a military uniform was salute and say, "Sir, yes, sir." And there was a lot of people on all sides who come out the end of the Second World War in exactly that situation. And then they had to rethink a lot of things and decide that no, just because somebody annoys you doesn't mean you can jump out, rip them out through the window of their car and prepare to kill them on the car park. But a mate of mine whose father was a commando in the Southwest Pacific in the Second World War, he did that a couple of times to people. Stopped himself from killing somebody over a parking bingle. Conditioned to kill, raised to think it was all okay. Had to figure it out from himself that it was not. If we postulate a skinny little conservative nerd who really understands the American Constitution, always wanted to be good with a gun, has lots of righteous fantasies of when it's okay to use a gun to defend the Constitution, defend the flag and the Constitution for which it stands from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And this kid has grown up in the era of Trump. And he was wearing a Demolition Ranch t-shirt. Demolition Ranch is a YouTube channel run by a fellow called Matt Eastman. Matt Eastman is a veterinarian in Texas. Very successful, rich veterinarian because he could afford to have a large firearm collection and kick off a YouTube channel 13 years ago. So Thomas Matthew Crooks was 7 years old when Demolition Ranch hit YouTube. What Matt Easton is, he's a recreational firearms enthusiast, right? He doesn't do much hunting. He doesn't use his guns for self-defense, although he talks about that a lot. All the American gun culture people tend to talk about self-defense a lot. They somehow imagine that within the limits of the God theory of thou shalt not kill, if they are afraid that somebody else might be going to kill them, then it's okay for them to kill the person or the thing of which they are frightened. They don't seem to accept the idea that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, because the Lord maketh me to lie down in the green pastures beside the still waters, you know, like go off and graze where the grass is sweet, like a goat. Oh no, they think that they shall fear no evil because they want to be the meanest, most heavily armed and armoured, flak-jacketed son of a bitch in the valley. That's not Christianity. It's not Judaism, it's not Islam, because all of those are descended from the Mosaic tenets and the Torah, the Jewish Old Testament, which is full of thou shalt not kill. And for the people who've got some kind of a universal creator God theory who espouses the thou shalt not kill teaching, which all of the most popular, most numerous, better God theories do sort of dovetail on those points. They have a choice. They can live the faith, which means looking at their book of God theories and going deeply into it and, well, here's a factoid, which I've heard quoted by many reputable theological scholars from several different faiths, and what they claim is that, because I haven't done it so I have to say claim, if you do a word search of the New Testament, which is basically people writing down their Jesus stories, and you count up all the things that Jesus is reputed to have said, what did he say the most often? And the big hits are, fear not. There is nothing to fear. You have nothing to fear. So it would seem to me that nobody who claims to be a Christian can justify wanting to have a weapon of deadly force in their possession, within reach, purely in case they might need to use it to kill something, because they might perhaps become afraid of it, because when it comes down to it, they don't trust their God theory worth a pinch of shit to the compost heap. In their actual behavioural response, they demonstrate that they don't trust their God theory at all. That's why they've got a gun. Their gun is to shoot the forces of evil that their God theory lets come and harass them anyway. Which brings one to wonder, what would be the response of a fair income God theory to the antics of somebody who prances about 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, beating their chest and singing in time with everybody else and ringing bells and burning incense and marching up and down and eating unleavened bread and drinking wine and singing songs and conducting warrior cannibal rituals, transmogrifying the wine and the bread into the flesh and the blood of the long dead prophet, and then eating it all. And I've seen this, marching up and down in step with both handguns and long arms, shoulder arms, inside the church of the God theory of the thou shalt not kill. One can only postulate as one attempts to pontificate as to what any reasonable God theory of thou shalt not kill might perhaps possibly do in response to a whole bunch of disciples and acolytes and followers, congregated, self-professed wannabes who behave in such a apostatic, hypocritical manner. What can they, God theory, do? Just let them go for it. It's a free will universe. I can use my free will as much as I like to go and buy a ticket to the zoo. And when I get there, I can ask them, where's the dodos? I want to look at a dodo, please. And they're all going to say to me, mate, you can't look at a dodo. Oh, but I decide to. I'm exercising my free will. Hammer on the table, wave. Raise your voice, go red in the face, wiggle your eyes. But I still can't exercise my free will to look at a dodo, because 400 years ago, an avaricious, that means greedy, selfish, violently murderous bunch of Dutchmen ate the last dodos on earth. They were on their way from Holland to Indonesia to steal the Spice Islands. And because they exercised their free will, their freedom to pick wrong, I can't look at a dodo. Because I exercised my freedom to pick wrong, I burnt 1,000 litres of liquid fossil fuel in 1999. And that's why the weather's as screwy as it is now, because it takes 25 years for a cube of carbon dioxide to float around achieving 95% of all the atmospheric warming, which it will cause. I've exercised that choice, that decision. I bought the fuel, I poked it in my machine, and I burned it. Free will. What do you do when you've got a 20-year-old who's been raised by gun nuts? He's really, really smart. He understands the Constitution and how it's supposed to work, how it was written, how it was put together by the founding fathers who were trying to get the hell away from the idea of a monarchy, trying to get away from a state religion. And he can see the country that he grew up in going down the spiral gurgly hole that Italy and Germany went down when they followed Mussolini and Hitler, going down authoritarian fascist gurgle holes, following people who want to terminate the Constitution, get rid of anybody who's a career civil servant or who understands how the government's supposed to work, and replace them with somebody who is loyal to Trumpy. I think that 20-year-old regarded himself, themself, as it's currently fashionable to speak about people if you're not personally informed as to their sexual preference or their pronouns of choice. I think that Thomas Matthew Crooks regarded themselves as being a patriot. He was between the ages of puberty and marriage, when young men really want to gather together in bands and go and do something dangerous for a noble cause. I think he accepted the fact that he was probably not going to last very long after he opened fire, but he got within 150 metres of an ex-president with 4 sniper teams covering him in a public place he managed to actually hit the target that he was trying to hit. He didn't kill the target that he was trying to kill. But here's the karmic feedback loop aspect of it. Young Mr. Cooks, he was attempting to head shoot Donald Trump. And I make it 5 seconds after he pulled the trigger. Mr. Cook had missed Trump's skull, missed his occiput, which is what he was shooting at. He has headshot an innocent bystander who was actually a really good bloke and a social hero. So he's inflicted the exact wound that he was planning and hoping and aiming to inflict on Trump. He's missed Trump by an inch, given him a place to hang a pirate earring. He's savagely wounded 2 other people, but 5 seconds after he fired his first shot at Trumpy, he's got the bullet in the head. And he got a Winchester 308 from a sniper's rifle funded by the government. So that was his lifetime, 5 seconds from opening fire with his AR-15 to taking the government lead injection through the probably front side of his head. Now, while he was up on the roof, and he was on the roof for 114 seconds, and there was 57 seconds between the first member of the public talking to the police and the police shooting him in the head. 57 seconds between the member of the public talking to the police and him opening fire, and I reckon there was 5 seconds of his gunfire. He fired a 3-round burst in less than 2 seconds. When his cordite smoke cleared, he saw Trumpy waving his hand, touching his ear. That's when he decided to fire again as Trumpy dropped down, and there's a flight time for 150 metres. 150 metres is 500 feet. Even at 3,000 feet a second, that's an appreciable time. By the time the 20-year-old, not very good shooter had thought things through, and there's the other thing. The cops were looking for him because his behaviour had been noticed, walking around outside the metal detectors with a rangefinder. Then he blended into the crowd, and they couldn't find him. They knew he hadn't gone in because he hadn't gone through the metal detectors. He'd just been seen outside measuring things. And then the cops who were looking for him bumped into the people who were trying to find a cop to say there's a bloke up on the roof. And they went at the building from a different angle. Either he'd pulled his ladder up or they didn't see the ladder. So one cop puts 2 hands together, the other cop stands in the hands and boosts him up to the point where he's got 2 hands hanging onto the guttering. He sticks his head up and he gets an AR-15 pointed at his forehead. So he drops the guttering and falls back down because, like, as one of the commentators I saw on YouTube put it, he's not going to chin himself on the guttering with one hand while he draws his gun and fires at the bad guy while the other guy's already pointed at his forehead. So that cop fell off and hurt himself. The fella on the roof, having cleared the threat from the policeman by dropping him to the ground, he knows he's got mere seconds. He then went straight up and started shooting, and I think there might have been 8 seconds between dropping the policeman off the guttering and opening fire on Trump. So he hasn't had any time to actually set his shot up or make a good shot. He's grabbed the gun, looked over the top of the scope, looked through the scope, and then he's fired 3 shots, thinking they were pretty good. He's realised they were shitty shots. He's tried to have another go. I think the creator of the universe has said to all of these people, every bloody one of you is under the category of OG of little faith, you're behaving like a bunch of atheists. That's why you've got so much faith and trust in guns and arms and armies and weapons. And instead of everybody just getting along with each other and trusting that the creator of the universe is going to motivate the other fellow to do the right thing, just like the creator of the universe motivates me to do the right thing, instead of thinking the absolute worst of everybody and trying to prepare yourself to kill them before they can do the worst thing you can imagine them doing, how about you just fucking get along with each other? How about everybody just does the right thing themselves, personally? Don't worry about trying to fucking police everybody else. There's enough miserably anxious assholes driven by their own throbbing insecurity complexes to be all the policemen and security guards in the world. It is an axiom, right? Self-evidentiary. Nobody can survive any length of time employed in the bracket in close bracket security quote industry close quotes unless they are already fundamentally psychologically insecure. Nobody goes and gets a job as a security guard standing outside a bank so they can get paid to be worried all day. What's going to happen? What might happen? Oh shit, what if? And then get a pay packet on Friday and go home and feel like they've done a good bloody week's work because nothing happened while they stood out the front of the bank and worried. Nobody in their right mind is going to stand still for that. The way you get to be in the mindset that'll stand still for that is if you were beaten and ill-treated as a kid, if you've grown up in terror and confusion. And when you experience terror and confusion as a child, it damages your amygdala and your hippocampus. And your amygdala is the part of your brain that responds to stress. So you've got a retarded amygdala. And you've got all these islands of memory stuck in your hippocampus, things which were in your short-term memory, and you don't want to think about them, so they're locked up in an island of memory. And when you come to a moment of stress, your damaged amygdala triggers the isolated island of memory, and you have a flashback of what freaked you out last time. And reputable psychologists and psychiatrists and social scientists have done really, really extensive research on this. The way to turn somebody into a right-wing authoritarian fascist wannabe is to frighten them and beat them as a child. Have a look at how many people who vote the right-wing authoritarian side of politics were beaten as a child, and they can't see anything wrong with beating their own children, and they're very big on punishment. And they want lots and lots of guns because they're afraid of everything. That's why they're worried about self-defense. Godless fucking behavioral atheists, every one of them. And what would you do if you were a reasonable, rational God theory? Sit on your hands and let them fucking play with each other. And when ballistic trajectories and the rules of physics and chemistry have winnowed them out, well, the compost heap will have plenty of blood in it. Yeah? It's all a result of their free choice. Absolute freedom of choice, perfect liberty, involves absolute perfect responsibility. Absolute freedom of choice involves perfect freedom to pick wrong. And if you pick wrong, the consequences go on. You don't get to have another do-over. If you do the wrong thing, you might as well fucking stop now. Like if you're in a hole up to your nose, stop digging. So what's going to happen with Trumpy and Norte Americano and the fact that nobody wants to vote for Biden and everybody's fucking terrified of Trump, and Trumpy's idea of unity is to just everybody has to fall in behind him, you see, and if they don't fall in behind him, they're not being unified. So let's open up FEMA camps for the 15 million illegal aliens that he wants to deport, and then after he deports them, he'll have some lovely FEMA camps to put anybody into who disagrees with whatever else he wants to do. I mean, the prospects are grim, Gunga Din. It's not looking good at all. Okay, so what have we forgotten? My suggestion is that an awful lot of what's occurred is going to be dovetailing snafus, miscommunications, misunderstandings, misapprehensions. Apparently, the Secret Service has a routine and a ritual, and what they normally do is they get somebody who knows what they're doing, what they're talking about, to go and stand in the spot where the protected person will be, and they look around at the horizon, and every high point they see that's in line of sight, they designate that as somewhere that needs to be covered. That means the rooftop that the shooter was on top of should have been on that list of things that are covered. 150 metres is nothing. People who've worked for the Secret Service as snipers say that they routinely sight things in 2,000 metres away from the person they are protecting, and they spend at least a week getting ready for such events. 150 metres. Now, at the moment, the local police are claiming that it was all the Secret Service's job, and the Secret Service are saying, no, we delegated that to the local police. And somebody else said that there were local police inside the building. Ding, 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 ding. Blooper alert. The Secret Service has seen this rooftop and they have said, or words to the effect, okay, local police officer, your department is to secure that building. Sir, yes, sir, said the paramilitary wannabe who got a job working for the local pay cops. And in their idea, in their mind's eye, securing the building, having watched all the war movies about Iraq and Absurdistan, they think that means get inside the building and make sure that nobody who's just shot the president tries to escape by coming out of the building. They got the book repository in 1963 on their mind. Somebody should have been guarding the door to stop Lee Harvey Oswald from running away. Or something to that effect. So there were local police inside the building and the gunman climbed up and he was on the roof. I think that's the genesis of a lot of problems. And here is the warbles on a lot solution. Are you ready for this? Why was there no helicopter overhead with a pink pig in a blue suit looking down with binoculars? Oh, look at that. Oh, why is this fella on the roof? Oh, what's he got a gun in his hand for? Why is he pointing it at the policeman? Oh. Okay, the first answer to that one, noise. Helicopters are loud. Presidential rallies, campaign rallies, the politician wants there to be a reassuring aura of quietness while they harangue the audience. So my first thought was obviously wrong. You don't need a helicopter. However, falling back on something said unto me by my son, the group officer in the RFS, he's currently taking a position in a debate that's going on within the RFS over the topic of tethered look-down drones. It's not FPV, first-person video, because there's nobody flying it but an autopilot, and it's on the end of a string, and they want every fire truck in the RFS to have one. And the idea is that it goes up 300 feet, 100 metres, and it sits there on the end of its string, and it looks down and it tells you what's on the other side of the next hilltop or ridge or tree line. For firefighting, I think it's a wanker of an idea, because the smoke means you're not going to see anything unless it's got a bloody infrared thermal camera in it, and that means it's going to be $1 million unit, and you're not going to put one of them on every fire truck. So the other problem with them is that you've got to stop the fire truck to deploy the drone. You can't drive around with the drone on the end of the string. So for firefighting, piece of shit. I'm pretty sure there's probably a drone exclusion zone around the area of the protected person during a rally, that the Secret Service doesn't want someone getting a Ukrainian type IED drone flying in. That would mean that the Secret Service drones or the police drones would have to have hardened communications. And I think you'd need 8 of them. You'd need to have 4 of them covering the area with a spare one at each launch point, so that when one of them gets tired batteries, you launch the spare before the first one comes down, and that would look down onto all of those rooftops. So that is your belt and braces, paranoid, godless, heathen, behavioural atheist view of it. Right? I can think like one of them because I used to be a gun nut. Yeah? I know what it's like to live out there on the other side of society's edge and have 5 guns hanging up on the wall, 7 guns hanging up on the wall, shooting all the meat I ate, fantasising about when the Mad Max days come. Yeah, life's a lot more fun when you have not got a gun. In my experience, and you know, what would I know? I just live on an endangered species sanctuary. So there's that. And then, of course, there's what's going to happen now. Like, what's the US response going to be? I think there's 360 million firearms spread out among 330 million Americans. 25% of the population owns all of the guns. The average firearm owner possesses 8. So that means that Thomas Cook's father had a bit more than twice as many guns as your average, 2.5 times as many as the average gun owner. But, you know, a couple of people who got 20 guns in their cupboard makes up for a lot of people who've only got 1. And yeah. So there's a lot of guns out there, and there's an awful lot of these Americans who believe that, they've got God on their side. They don't believe they have to do what God says they've got to do because God's on their side. In their view, the 10 Commandments and the Mosaic tenets and Jesus' teachings, all of the teachings in the Old Testament, they're all well and good. But with God on our side, we don't have to actually obey any of it. We get to enforce it. We get to spread our religion with a sword, or an AK-47, or an Uzi, or an AR-15. With God on your side, you don't have to worry about war crimes tribunals because you're going to win the war, aren't you? You're going to write the history. In Roman times, it would have been a great religion. You know, you could go down to the local temple and you could worship Mars, the traditional god of war, with Phobos and Deimos, the dogs of the god of war. Pandemonium and chaos, fear and panic, the dogs of the god of war. And in America, essentially to sell more penny dreadful pulp Western fiction magazines, adventure books, thrillers, their print culture first, and then their radio culture, and then their film culture, and then their television culture, and then the game culture and the internet. They've lionized and glorified organized assault and battery and robbery in groups. They raise people to believe that they're God-fearing Christians and God's on their side, and then they tell them that when a politician declares that a state of war exists, it's okay to put all of that religion and spiritual stuff about murder and killing and right and wrong and God and what you're not allowed to do, and just go out there and designate somebody else as being the enemy and kill the bloody lot of them. And then come home and expect free education, pension rights, free healthcare, interest-free home loan for the rest of your life because you have served your country. Well, okay, I understand that a lot of people think like that, and I was raised to think like that, and I grew up not questioning it until I helped pick up the pieces of every military adventure Australia was a part of from 1914 to 1984. 2,000 veterans, I nursed them for 5 days each, on average. I went into it a true believer in the Anzac legend and Biggles fantasist, and I came out of it a pacifist, fully understanding the chain of command is a crock of shit and that all war is always all bullshit. So anybody who's looking forward to an American second civil war and they think they're going to emerge as a bigger, better, brighter and more powerful nation, that isn't what happens. Have a look at Gaza. How much bigger, better, brighter civilization did Hamas bring about? But that doesn't matter to Hamas. They weren't trying to bring about a bigger, better, brighter civilization. They were trying to do something that would enrage the Israelis to the point where the Israelis would reveal themselves to the rest of the world as being a bunch of people who think God's on their side. So the international articles of war and the International Court of Justice don't matter a tuppenny shit to the Israeli Defence Force because God's on their side. And as far as they're concerned, if they kill 20 Palestinians in order to exterminate one Hamas threatened, suspected operative, that's a good bargain because that's one more Hamas person who can't possibly be planning on hurting an Israeli. What they pay no attention to is that this is a great way to ensure that everybody else who ever knew or heard of the person that they just killed is going to hate Israel with a passion. And every time you kill a terrorist, you manufacture a whole lot more of them. They're losing sight of the fact that a terrorist is a loser's word for somebody they can't beat. That's why every German occupation soldier who was killed in the Second World War by partisans, it was written on their death certificate that they died as a result of terrorist activity. Because the Germans couldn't beat the terrorists. Terrorist is a loser's word for someone you can't beat in normal military terms. So you declare them to be subhuman and they're not subject to the normal rules of war. Oh, you're not wearing a uniform. We don't have to take you prisoner. We can drop bigger bombs on you. You know, like, this is all artificial, constructed tofu dreck in philosophical, religious, spiritual terms. Unless somebody thinks that there is no such thing as a God theory, or unless they think their God theory is powerless, infantile and stupid, they wouldn't be behaving in such a way and then claiming to be pious. So it's very difficult to know where it's going to go or what to do best other than withdraw, sit back, remember that the meek shall inherit the earth. And the mechanism by which the meek shall inherit the earth is that the children of combat veterans display 300% the annual death by suicide rate as compared to the children of normal parents within the background population from which the combat veterans and their children were drawn. As well as dying off at 3 times the rate by suicide, they also die off at 180% the normal rate from accidents and 120% the normal rate from illness. So all told, the children of combat veterans exhibit an annual death rate from suicide, accident and illness 4 times greater than the death rate from those causes exhibited by children of normal parents who have never been in combat. Right? Donald Trump's children's death rate from suicide just went up 400% because he got shot in the ear 3 days ago. He's now a combat veteran. He's been in the situation where the shitstorm went past him and it didn't even miss him. It hit him, it clipped him, it pierced his ear, and it missed his brain case by 1.5 inches. He saw the elephant. And I've got to talk about this. I was bloody surprised that President Bone Spurs, who got daddy's doctor's letters to keep him out of Vietnam, he stood there, yappity, 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 yap. He heard the gunfire go past his head and he didn't realise what it was. Then he felt the bullet hit his ear and he reached up and he touched it. He saw it. He realised he'd been shot. He didn't stand there waiting for the next lot. He dropped. Plop. And then he stayed down, and when he heard the Secret Service, after firing that final shot, you know, bang, 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 bang. Then he heard shooters down. That's when he let them stand him up. And he took the punt. He took the bet that there was only one, and they're trying to run him away and cover him up. And Donald, the actually fucking brave, he says, no, hold on a minute. I want to have a photo opportunity. Fight, 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 fight. And of course, somebody got it. The blood on the face, the ear just out of sight, the fist in the air, the flag flying on the crane, the Secret Service people cowering under him. Absolute iconographic gold as far as images go. I have no idea what the excited status of Norte Armed Americano is going to do next. I'm riveted by the spectacle of it all. Thank God they gave me some functional plastic fangs I can stick in with Polydent. That means I can eat popcorn. I can even eat dried salted corn. I'm fucking near living on nuts these days. Jesus, it's nice after porridge for a year and a half. Ah, you know what? In 3 hours' time, it'll be 3 years since I started getting me head cooked. And at that particular point in the time, I was embarking on 2 months of having me head cooked, and I had 3 months life expectancy if it failed. Yeah. So here I am, trying to earn me pension, sitting in me little hut in the rain, pontificating and pondering and analysing and trying to make sense of what, for, how, come and why Trumpy did not get shot in the brain. What can you really say? It's like, let's compare Trumpy and Hitler and Rupert Murdoch. Probably Elon Musk as well. In the case of Hitler, his father was a nasty, violent, negligent, abusive, misogynist, and Hitler grew up as a craven attention seeker spoilt by his mother. He was intelligent, but he didn't get raised nicely. He didn't have a warm, loving, stable environment that was interesting and informative and leading him on to think about good, noble, worthwhile things. He came to believe that warfare was the ultimate function of humankind, and that he and his followers would trample on the crushed skulls of their enemies, or their enemies would trample all over his followers' crushed skulls. He was a very warped and twisted, bent sort of a fellow, but he looks like he was an orchid child who was raised badly. Now, the idea of orchid children and dandelion children came out of some Israeli research where they got all of the gene markers for axe murdering deduced by taking DNA from people who were in jail for being incorrigible, violent criminals, but really smart ones. And they got a whole bunch of 3-year-olds who had all these gene markers allegedly for being axe murderers, and they put them through a series of research studies where the researcher and the kid sit at a table, and they both open a packet of biscuits or lollies or candies, and the kid's got about 8 and the researcher's only got 1 or 2. And all of the normal kids, they just, yeah, Yahoo, yippee, I got all these and you only got 1, you know. And all the kids who had the gene for allegedly being axe murderers, they looked at it and said, this isn't fair, here, have half of mine. And it turned out that the gene markers for being axe murderers was actually a gene marker for being sensitive. So if these kids got a really, really loving, kind, beautiful, stimulating, educative, informative environment with lots of cuddles and no confusion and no shouting and no fear and no terror, in the absolute best case, they might in primary school invent for themselves the sundial that tells you that your kid's a genius. That's the one that was invented independently by Isaac Newton and Christopher Wren, the fellow who designed the great cathedral in London. Both these kids were in primary school. They were at home sick. And while they were bored in their bedroom, they figured it out, and their parent comes in and finds they've got a mirror on the window ledge on the side of the house facing the equator, south side in the northern hemisphere. And they've marked in charcoal on the ceiling the hour lines, and they're watching the reflected image of the sun trace its way across the hour lines on the ceiling. The reflected ceiling sundial. That's the one that tells you your primary school age kid is a genius and you are raising them well. Okay, that's the idea of the orchid children. Your dandelion children, they're never going to reach any heights of greatness, but just as an orchid needs really perfect soil, dandelions will grow in sand with a bit of a rainstorm once a month. And they don't compete with orchids for beauty of the flower, but they produce a flower, and the flower will breed and produce a seed. Dandelion kids can grow in pretty much any kind of conditions. In fact, a dandelion kid with a bit of shitty parenting might grow up to be a lot better than their parents, because if you grow up watching your father beat your mother, you think that's a pretty piss poor show, and you might grow up to be a teetotaler because you're not going to behave like that. But the orchid children who grow up with shitty parenting, let's look at Joseph Djugashvili. Joey's father was a cobbler, a drunken one, a violent drunken cobbler. His mother was a very pious Christian. And the drunken cobbler used to beat the mother and used to beat Joe. He beat him so hard when he was 11, he broke his left elbow. Compound fracture, bone sticking out through the skin. And then he beat him again and 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 again. And by the time the kid was 13, the broken elbow still hadn't healed, and that was when Mrs. Djugashvili put young Joseph into the local seminary to be turned into a priest. And they didn't beat him. Or perhaps their orthopaedic nursing skills were better than Mrs. Djugashvili's. Anyway, his elbow healed, sort of, kind of. He couldn't straighten his arm, and he couldn't fully flex it. And he could hold a bit of paper or a cigarette if he put it in there between the fingers with the other hand, but he couldn't pick up a cigarette, couldn't pick anything up. Crippled. 2 inches short, that arm was. Anyway, when he was 17, he was such a nasty bastard that the seminary people said to him, look, you're too warped and twisted and vicious and horrible to ever be a priest. Think about that statement. Think about all the bastards and what damage they've done as bad priests, and they've been let go through. Young Joseph Djugashvili at 17, he was too bad to be a priest. So they spat him out, and he went off, and he looked around, and he joined a mob of rebellious revolutionaries, and they looked at him, and they saw how he talked and how he behaved, and they gave him a gun and gave him a job robbing banks. And that's what he did with the Bolsheviks. He robbed banks. And then he decided that Djugashvili wasn't a fit name for a bank robber, so he changed his name to Joseph Man of Steel, which in Russian is Stalin. And that's how Joseph Stalin got to be as big and ugly a bastard as he turned out to be. He's the world's greatest murderer. He killed more people, had them killed on his orders, than any other person that ever lived. He died when he was in his 70s, whereas fucking Adolf Hitler, he run out of free hits on his Cosmic scoreboard account, from shit he was taught and bullshit he was raised up to believe. When he was 56, he shit himself as he shot himself when his world turned to turds. Yeah? He got his just desserts. Karmic feedback loops within the Cosmic Scoreboard-Effect brought him to the point where he did that to himself rather than face the consequences of his actions. of all of his own choices. Stalin, he was planning his fifth purge in his 70s, and he closed the doors on his bedroom, and his household servants heard him hit the marble floor on the other side of the doors with a bone-jarring flat thwap, smack, bone on stone. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's a particular noise. And he was such a vicious bastard, and he had them so terrified that they left him there. They didn't go and open the door and look at him until 10 o'clock the next morning, 5 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 in the morning. He closed the doors and had a stroke. He fell down there and he lay in a puddle of his own piss with one of his own turds in his trousers until they come in and found him the next morning, cold and shivering on the ground. Well, he wouldn't have even been shivering because he was unconscious from the stroke. Autonomic dysreflexia wouldn't have set in by that point. So anyway, yeah, he lasted for another 3 or 5 days, but he never did any actual conscious suffering because his childhood was so fucking bad that he never saw anything wrong with what he did. All he was doing was behaving the way he was raised. Rupert Murdoch, his father was an absolutely, totally driven journalist trying to be a bigger, better journalist than his father was. And Rupert Murdoch, what is he? 90-something years old. I think he just split up from his fifth wife or his fourth wife. Or did he marry his fourth or his fifth wife? Still running his company, still flat out trying to compete with the memory of his father who never gave him enough cuddles when he was supposed to be being breastfed. And Rupert had a lovely, loving, kind mother. She was Australia's greatest philanthropist. She gave away heaps of money. Rupert's never been known to donate a brass razoo. He doesn't donate to any charities. Trumpy. Donald Trump's mother couldn't stand him. She sent him to a military fucking boarding school when he was an infant, like the primary school. Every time he came home on holidays, she'd piss off and go somewhere else. So he was raised between a military college and military boarding school and his father, who was an absolutely vicious, savage, avaricious, greedy, corrupt, criminal landlord, land speculator, real estate tycoon, who turned Trump's elder brother into a alcoholic because he was a nice bloke who wanted to be a nice bloke and couldn't live up to daddy's expectations of being a turd. And Donald of the J Trump variety, he was yes daddy, no daddy, 3 bags full daddy, I'll do whatever daddy. And he's still trying to live up to his understanding of his father's expectations. And he doesn't see anything wrong with what he's doing, and he's never had anybody stand up to him before. He's never had any actual real world consequences for any of the shit that he's ever pulled since his father died, until someone shot him in the ear hole. I don't know what that's going to do to Donald Trump's psyche, and I don't know what it's going to do to America's psyche. But pass the popcorn, fellas. This is going to be really fucking interesting to watch. I'm really glad I'm sitting at Trans-Pacific diagonal distance. I have very great fears and trepidations for the future safety of my friends and viewers and contacts and subscribers in the excited status of Norte Americano. Because what I fear is that there won't be any coordinated civil war. What there will be is a series of fucking 5-cornered contests to shoot up each individual town and district, state governors mobilising the National Guard against each other and against the bloody federal army in Washington, Meanwhile, on each street, anybody who's got a gun and a can of baked beans to defend it with is going to shoot anybody who's dishevelled walking down the street because they might be a zombie. "35% of all Americans and 10% of Democrats believe that political violence is acceptable in some circumstances." That means if their side's losing. And yeah, I think 30 to 60% of the, well, 30% of the Democrats and 60% of the Republicans have got guns. And since Rupert Murdoch went to America and had Ronald Reagan repeal the Fairness Doctrine, 1932 or 32 Congressional Fairness Doctrine, which used to outlaw any editorial or news material which is broadcast or distributed across state borders, which could not be proved to be true according to the best known science at the time. It used to be illegal to tell lies in American news and current affairs until Rupert Murdoch got Reagan to change that. So for 38 years, the Americans have had Rupert Murdoch pouring total garbage and bullshit, exciting, outrageous horse turds in their ears and rubbing their eyes in it because that secures better engagement, which means you can put more ads and charge more into the programming, and you can charge more money for them, and it costs less to pay talking heads to gabble bullshit at each other in a room under lights with the camera than it does to send actual reporters out and find out what's happening and broadcast the news. Sure, everybody in the world could wake up tomorrow and decide to become a pacifist and a vegetarian and live their lives so as to do as little damage to the environment as possible, and we could all live happily ever after despite what we've done to the global climate. But that's not what they want to do. They want to grow the economy and they want to fight over the last fucking oil well. And in America, they want to force everybody else to agree with their religion. They're doing that in India as well. Whereas in China, you've got to worship the Communist Party. Oh, golly gosh, gee darn shucks. And people wonder why I'm feeling gloriously grateful and happy to be given a pension from the government to sit up here as the fool on the hill and think about what matters and give away all my best work. Because I'm no fucking good at trying to make money and compete within the economy because it's trying to trash the biosphere, because no economic activity is possible unless you can find a pre-existing environmental surplus to be over-harvested and transported to market and sold at a profit to somebody whose ancestors have already turned their own ancestral homeland into a desert, a food desert. It's only taken 12,300 years for the broadacre death cult of harvest everythingism to reduce Earth to this. And I almost feel fucking clever with myself for having paid rates on 100 acres for 33 years to give it a rest, so that if I have to try and learn how to live like a blackfella, at least I'm doing it on a bit of dirt that's had 3 decades to heal itself after 150 years of being farmed by European methods. I think I grew up in such a time and such a place where I was exposed to a whole lot of silly ideas, and I must have resisted a lot of temptations to be a very selfish arsehole. Maybe perhaps that's why I appear to be getting such a fucking dream run free trip ticket within the residential space of the biosphere of planet Earth, spinning on its axis, orbiting the sun as the whole solar system flies through space. My experience is if you try to be a selfish smartass and get all that's out there, your life turns to turds. And if you sit back and Try very hard not to take more than your fair share and see what you can do to be as nice as you can to everybody else, even if they are a kangaroo or a possum. By golly gosh, life can turn out to be very pleasant and tranquil and interesting and rewarding and non-threatening. Fear not, there is nothing to fear. Have no fear. You want to be a Christian? Start thinking about the way Jesus lived and stop thinking about Mars, the god of war, and how you can be more powerful than whatever the fuck it is that you're frightened of. And take a fool's advice, don't go anywhere near Trumpy, because I don't know that that's going to be the last time that he gets to experience gunfire. Somebody in Australia was going to have a concert and they made a comment on their Instagram to the effect that you shouldn't miss next time when you're aiming at Trumpy. That's considered to be in terribly bad taste and it's all too soon and you're not allowed to make jokes about such things. I'd really like to point out that what happened with the bloke who wanted to head shoot Trumpy, head shooting an innocent bystander who was a pillar of the community, and then themselves copping a headshot 5 seconds after squeezing the trigger on their first one. Karma. Karmic feedback loops within the cosmic scoreboard effect. But what it all means is if you choose to get close to Trumpy, you could be walking into a gunfire zone. I don't know how he's going to react, whether he's going to take that moment and emerge from it thinking, God's on my side, I am protected, even unto being shielded from gunfire. Or whether he's going to come out of that thinking, if I had have looked left instead of right, it would have been Trumpy's brains decorating the podium. And he didn't know. And his idea of a God theory apparently didn't give two knobs of goat shit for the bloke who chose to go and stand close to Trump and all that Trump stands for. And all them fires that he fought, all them good things that he did with all of his life, that just means he was a nice bloke, he was a well-meaning individual. But he chose to go and stand behind Trump. And as they say, if you lie down with dogs, you are going to get up with fleas. He chose to stand close to Trump. Even good people can have silly ideas. And if you have a silly idea, it doesn't matter how well-meaning you are. You can go down in a pile of shit just like every well-meaning Allied aircrew member who got shot down while trying to bomb civilians in the designated enemy country. My father had a cousin who was a preacher's son, and he and his crew sang while in the truck going out to climb into their Lancaster in July to fly out over Hamburg in 1943. They sang, "We shall bomb the blind and helpless, we will kill the halt and lame, we burn grandmothers and babies 'cause they're Germans all the same." That's what a Presbyterian minister's son was singing while being driven out to his 4-engine bomber to go and rain death and destruction on German civilians. Doing God's work, fighting for peace, making the world a better place by dropping high explosives on somebody else's head over political differences. What do you think young Mr. Cook was doing? And why do you think he was doing it? I think he was fighting to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think he thought he was a patriot, and what America thinks he was doing is going to be up to America. I am not a citizen of America. I'm a subject of King Chuckles Deterred. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.